Hi, good afternoon, and thanks for joining the fourth AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowship live chat series. If you're joining us for the first time, welcome. And if you participate in previous chats, welcome back. My name is Cynthia Bernardez, and I'm Program Manager for the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowships. I manage the Judicial Fellowship as well as the Executive Branch Fellowship and work with fellows who are placed at the Federal Judicial Center, National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Justice, and National Institute of Science and Technology. I will be your moderator for today's chat. So each month during the fellowship, each month during the application cycle for the 2018-19 S&T Policy Fellowship year, we are hosting a series of live chats. Each chat has a specific theme and is an opportunity for you to hear from and connect with fellows of very disciplined backgrounds and career stages. Fellows will be sharing their experiences in the program and answering your questions. You can submit a question at any time by clicking in the question box and typing your question there. Today, we'll be hearing from two fellows who are mid-career, and they will be sharing their experiences as a judicial fellow at the Federal Judicial Center and as a legislative branch fellow at the House of Representatives Committee on Energy and Commerce. The AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowships is an immersive policy experience where you spend a year in one of the three branches of the federal government. As a policy fellow, you are taking a step back to retool, reinvigorate, and understand how to apply your background and training broadly to help develop and execute solutions to address today's most pressing societal challenges. In the process, you gain hands-on policy experience and join a highly influential network of fellows. Fellows and a network of over 3,100 alumni fellows represent a broad range of career stages and diverse disciplinary backgrounds. AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowships are offered in all three branches of federal government. The Executive Branch Fellowship are federal agency placements, and we award approximately 150 executive branch placements each year. Legislative branch fellowships are in congressional offices or committees. AAAS sponsors 2 legislative branch fellows each year. The Judicial Fellowship is at the Federal Judicial Center, and we award 1 judicial fellow each year. During today's chat, you'll learn more about the legislative and judicial branch placements. Applicants can and should consider applying to more than 1 fellowship. You can learn more about each program area, including potential host offices, by clicking Become a Fellow link on the fellowship website. So we are currently accepting applications for the 2018-19 fellowship year. The application deadline is November 1st. Eligibility requirements include holding U.S. citizenship and a doctoral degree in science or engineering. Applicants with a master's in engineering and 3 years of professional engineering experience are also eligible to apply. For the Judicial Fellowship, applicants must also have 3 years of post-degree professional experience. Visit the fellowship website for full details about program areas, eligibility, and the application process. Now, I'd like to introduce the fellows joining us today. Pate Skene is a 2016-17 Judicial Branch Fellow, and he is hosted at the Federal Judicial Center, where he works on challenges for courts evaluating scientific and technical evidence. He is an associate research professor at Duke University. Pate is a neurobiologist and lawyer who studies brain mechanisms that allow humans to live and cooperate in large, complex societies. Pate holds a Ph.D. in neuroscience, and also it is Pate's birthday. David Cwiertny is a 2016-17 AAAS Legislative Branch Fellow. His fellowship placement is the House of Representatives Committee on Energy and Commerce and its subcommittees on energy and environment. In this capacity, he worked on issues including legislation updating the Safe Drinking Water Act, reauthorization of the Brownfields Program, energy infrastructure and delivery systems, management of nuclear waste and oversight of EPA implementation of updates to the Toxic Substances Control Act. David is an associate professor of civil environmental engineering at University of Iowa. David holds a Ph.D. in environmental engineering. Thank you both for joining us.
Good to be here.
Thanks for having us.
So, guys, Pate and David are here to answer your questions and share their fellowship experience, policy insight, and career impact. As a reminder, please click the question box to submit your question. Please keep your question short and direct it to a particular individual or the whole panel. We will try to get to as many questions as possible today. So I'd like to start us off with a question. So often mid-career or mid to senior career scientists and engineers hear AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowships and assume this fellowship program wouldn't be a good fit for them. What prompted you to apply to the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowships, and why did you decide to apply at this point in your career? Pate, you can answer first.
Well, in my case, I was already making a transition in my career. I'd been a neurobiologist and a molecular biologist for many years, and decided to apply what I was learning and thinking about social cognition and brain mechanisms for social cognition to a set of complex social decisions, in this case, how people make and implement laws. That eventually, through a long series of events, led me to go to law school and become a lawyer. So I was already returning to my neuroscience work and beginning to translate that back into what kind of research I could do that had policy implications and how I could think about the policy implications. So for me, it was part of a sort of mid-career transition that I'd already started, and I was looking for a way to actually get some government experience to implement that.
David?
Yeah, I'm a tenure-track faculty member, tenured. I think I had a sabbatical coming up, and that was really what dictated the timing. But you have a bit of a choice to do a very traditional sabbatical in my discipline, which is you keep doing in many ways more of the same. You do research, you try to generate products where you can publish papers or maybe start a new collaboration. I think at the stage in the career I was at, I felt like I had done all the things I was supposed to do sort of by the letter of the academic law, and published my papers and done high-impact science, but really felt like that impact wasn't translating into like obvious, clear societal benefits. And I think environmental engineering is one of these disciplines where it was founded to protect public health and the environment, and there really should be that connection, and I felt like I was missing it. And so this fellowship seemed like an outstanding opportunity to try to see where there is a current disconnect between the work we do fundamentally in a research laboratory and how that better informs or translates into policy that actually impacts public health and the environment. I felt like I wanted to increase that impact, and seeing and living this experience for the year on Capitol Hill was a great way to turn it around and figure out how I could do things differently back here at the University of Iowa in the research lab to generate information and evidence that's more useful to policymakers. And that was a real motivator for me.
Okay. Which kind of, so now we'll turn the table over to your questions. So please use the question box to submit your questions. I have one question. So, please describe your typical day as a AAAS Science and Technology Fellow. What projects were you currently working on at the FJC for Pate and the Congressional Office for David? How did you decide which projects to work on? So, David, I'll turn this question over to you.
Sure. No one day was really the same. Our schedule was largely set the morning of, and just depending on the issues of the day and where the priorities of the committee and the congressman that we were working primarily under were set. And so, but there were general similarities. I mean, you take a lot of meetings and you interact with people that are relevant to the issues you're working on. We do a lot of writing and communication. The committee staffs that I worked with were largely there to help take complex technical and science issues and translate into a way that not only that the representatives on the committee could understand, but the general public could understand. And so you do a lot of writing, a lot of memos, a lot of talking points, a lot of summaries of bills and policy positions. And so really useful in terms of getting comfortable communicating complex issues to broad audiences. In terms of the types of issues that we work on, it was really just set by the legislative agenda. On these committees, the majority sets the issues that the committee is going to consider, and we spend a lot of time trying to get our messages and our priority areas as much daylight and limelight as possible. But there's a lot of the day that's spent and the work spent just responding to whatever sort of the issue of the day is coming from the majority or what pops up on our legislative calendar. So I guess a common theme there is flexibility, being pretty comfortable not knowing what the routine will be each day in terms of specific issues, but knowing that there are skills that you can sort of polish and refine during your time as a fellow that will make it a little bit easier to be more productive from day to day.
Pate?
I think the Judicial Fellowship, particularly the Federal Judicial Center, works on a sort of a different pace and model. The FJC is a research and education branch of the courts. It's the research and education branch of the courts. So there's a research division and an education division that develops papers that will assist judges and other people in the judicial system to understand issues, legal and technical issues, and then develops educational materials. So I ended up working on, doing a lot of my work on questions around the validity and ways to assess the validity of forensic sciences. And that came about because about the time I was starting my fellowship, there was a report that was released by the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, PCAST, that was highly critical of a lot of forensic sciences. And this was following up on an area of controversy and debate that's been going on for several years. There was a lot of pushback to that report, and the implication of that was that courts were going to need to decide what, if any, changes to make in the way they looked at forensic evidence coming into the courtroom as a result of this report and the criticisms, responses to it. So that seemed like a natural place for me to try to do some legal research and clarify some technical issues. So in some ways it resembles what David was talking about. Some of that mission was trying to write in ways that would clarify what some of the scientific criticism was, translate that in a way that was useful for judges and others in the judicial system, and then relate it to the actual case law, the rules and the case law governing what courts are supposed to do. So that became sort of my mission, and then I find it really interesting in terms of the daily routine. A lot of this was following, a lot of what I did was following up on that. So the research division where I was placed is people who are in many ways academics. Sometimes it's described as very much like an academic department. So you go in and you work on your projects, and as you know, with your faculty colleagues, you end up talking to your colleagues at the FJC for help or guidance, or the library staff who are very, very good for help, and then develop whatever written product you're trying to produce. The other thing that happened is that there are developments. The things are continuing to develop. In our case, in the case of this year's fellowship, there was a change of administration. There were some policy changes with what we call the National Commission on Forensic Sciences that was due to expire. The new administration decided not to renew it, but instead to have some initiatives within the Department of Justice. And so in the midst of my writing, there were some new developments. I said, okay, how does that change what courts need to do? So that fed into my project.
We have another question. How did you choose the fellowship area to which you applied? Pate, in your case, this was the Judicial Fellowship, and David, you applied to the legislative branch. You know, again, how did you choose to apply to this fellowship? So, Pate, you can take this on.
Okay, I'll start first. For me, I actually applied. You know, you can still apply, I think, in 2 areas. Can you not? I did apply in 2 areas. in part because I was torn. I was very interested in both the executive branch and the judicial branch fellowships, and also because I knew so little about them that I wasn't quite sure. I wanted to sort of keep my options open and learn about it as I went along. In the end, I had the opportunity to do the judicial fellowship, and because I was making a transition and recently become a lawyer, it seemed such an opportunity, and I had a former professor from law school who I asked about this opportunity, and he essentially said, if you have an opportunity to go work at the FJC and you don't take it, you are an idiot. So that made the decision for me, since I neither wanted to be an idiot nor wanted this person whom I admired to think I was. So that seemed like a great choice. I really didn't know what I was getting into, except that everyone I talked to who had experience with the FJC strongly encouraged me to do it, and I trusted them and I took a shot at it.
David?
Yeah, I had a similar experience with Pate in terms of I applied both to the legislative and the executive. In the executive, it used to be, I think, where you would specify sort of a focus area, and they had an energy and environment group of agencies that made a lot of sense for me. At the end, I was even fortunate enough to have offers from both the executive branch and the legislative to choose between, and what ultimately made the decision for me was twofold, really. And in my everyday life as a professor back here and getting research funded to study some of the issues we study, I had a decent amount of interactions with agencies like the EPA and NSF and USDA, and I sort of felt like I had a sense of how those operations worked. And then, you know, the second bit was just the opportunity to work in Congress was something that was really special and unique, and I felt like it something I couldn't pass up. And so I think that was why I applied to the legislative in the first place, is it seemed like something, in some ways it's a great form of public service. You're trying to do it. You can use your expertise to help in any way you can with related to issues at the federal level in terms of policy. And I wanted to sort of throw my hat in the ring there and see if I could contribute. And so that's what ultimately ended up sealing the deal in that direction for me.
One question came in. How difficult was it to maintain your research group during the period of your fellowship? So David, I'll turn this over to you.
You know, it was, there's a lot to that question. I'll say it sort of ties into the job that I ended up choosing on the Hill, where I went to the committee staff more than being a member office, joining a member's office, because I think the time commitment in the member's office, I mean, there's every opportunity in the legislative branch in Congress there's a high workload, and it keeps you busy. But I felt that the committee work was a little bit more predictable in terms of schedule, and there was also a team that I worked with. There were about 8 of us that did energy and environment issues, and so I knew that if something came up, I was very clear starting out. I had students that were finishing their Ph.D.s that I needed to get back to Iowa, or at least be able to be on Skype to participate in those defenses. And they were willing to work with me, and it worked out really, really well in that regard. And so some of it was having the right opportunity in the office that I chose, being the committee staff. The other issue, I mean, it was hard. I sort of joked that I was doing 2 or 3 jobs, it felt like, and I was meeting with my students in the evening over Skype, because I still had a group of about 7 or 8 students that were working on research projects back here at Iowa. And, you know, they were very patient with me, and I did the best I could to commit to them, and I owe it to my wife and kids for letting me, you know, be on Skype at times when I probably didn't want to be, and they certainly didn't want me to be. But we made it work, and I don't think, you know, there are opportunities to this program where you can maintain your research activities and not, I think there's a perception that you have to completely stop that or give it up, and that's not at all the case. I a lot of people don't know, but I still wrote proposals while I was there. Got a couple of proposals funded through NSF and other things while I was working on Congress, and I was told that wasn't a conflict of interest, so I'm freely saying that. So you can find it. You just have to be dedicated and really sort of committed to making it work out, and be upfront with people when you're at that point of looking at offices, and let them know your situation. And I was quite happy to see how many were willing to at least understand the commitments that I still had back in Iowa.
Pate?
Yeah, my experience was similar and perhaps a little bit easier in that because I was already making a transition, I had reduced my individual group very small and was sort of starting some new but collaborative research projects, and the result of that was that I had, unlike David, I didn't have any students or postdocs for whom I was primarily responsible, which made my life much easier. There was always someone else that they could talk to when I wasn't available. But nonetheless, the FJC is a good placement for, as with David, a limited amount, but some time. They're very flexible in terms of the timing and work with me a lot on being able to do what I need to do. And when things came up, in David's case, for example, as David mentioned, I also applied for funding and had a grant that went through the full process. I think I applied in August of last year. So, went through the whole sort of grant cycle and funding process. And in my case, it worked out well. It'll be funded starting September 1st. So I sort of
congratulations.
Again. So I had a little easier time than David in the sense that I was in the midst of sort of shifting to new projects. And so I sort of used my research time this year, my geek time this year, to make those transitions and set things up. That will be ready for me when I get back next week. But it is still emphasize that it is possible, and we're still writing papers and doing things. So on a limited schedule, it still works.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to follow up and really add, because I remember being in this same position about, you thinking about applying and can this really be done, and you get a little bit of mixed messages. But I think with enough planning and thought and preparation, if you're passionate enough about this opportunity for the year, you can make it work. And I think it's totally worthwhile. There's nobody I certainly felt like it was a year of hard work at times, but I wouldn't have traded it for anything. It was such a tremendous amount of experiences that I got to have working in Congress, and I'm sure Pate would say the same thing, that I would do it again in a heartbeat. And I'm just grateful to the people that were willing to be patient with me to let it happen. So I don't be deterred if you're mid-career and thinking about it. It can be done.
I completely agree. The planning ahead, putting some things in place. David did it one way, I did it another. Sort of that your obligations are covered, and that things you can maintain on a limited schedule while you're gone. But in my case, I wouldn't trade it for anything. And I was sort of talking to my mentors and colleagues at the FJC as I was winding down yesterday, and saying, nearly my whole research schedule for the coming year has been set by things I learned at the FJC this year. So a whole bunch of new projects to get me started jumping back in quickly next week.
Yeah.
This is kind of a trend, well, on the same path. So how has your fellowship experience changed your academic work? Or did you change the focus of your career after the fellowship? So how has the fellowship, changed your what you will go back to academically? David, you want to take this?
Yeah, absolutely. It has a huge influence. Both the experiences from Congress and what just the AAAS program and its principles and what it emphasizes. And so what I loved about AAAS and doing this program at the time that we're in, sort of, where science sits in policy, is it's just this real strong message of evidence-based decision making. And what is good evidence, and how do we generate it as a scientific community, and how do we use that to inform better decisions? I mean, I'm taking that message straight to the classroom. I was in a fortunate position where we got a grant before I started in the fellowship, where we're going to be doing some new things in our graduate program, but I'm getting an opportunity to talk a little bit in some of my classes about this science policy interface, and I couldn't be better prepared after what AAAS sort of instilled in us through the orientation and just through the year of experience. And so it's certainly improved the teaching tremendously, because I feel like I can talk to students about what we need them to really be well versed in, not just their core discipline, but all these other skills that we now appreciate that scientists and engineers have to make their role in society clear and valuable. And then from a research standpoint, sort of like what Pate was saying, I mean, I kept telling people I felt like I had a lot to learn in Congress of what were the issues that were most pressing, and I chose my placement in large part because I knew the Committee of Energy and Commerce was working on things like chemical regulation through TSCA, and we study chemical fate in the environment. And so what better way to know where are our gaps, where are our holes, and how we understand the risks of chemicals than to see what Congress is struggling with. And I have a lot of ideas of things I want to research now. proposals that I could craft to fill gaps that I know exist and generate data that I know people need to make better decisions. And so it all really ties together, you know, that idea we can teach scientists and engineers better with this idea of, you know, evidence-based decision-making and translating that into societal and political policy benefits. But also, I know what type of data they want to see to help make those decisions, and I feel like I have the platform with my research group to help sort of fill some of those holes.
Excuse me, Pate?
Yeah, certainly on the teaching side, it's quite a change for me because the work I was doing and what I was learning in the process generated more ideas for new courses and new teaching ideas than I can implement in a reasonable time. So I've had to, in fact, sort of schedule them as how I would like to roll them out on a time frame that I can actually manage. So I mentioned before we went live, I was mentioning to David, I'm developing a new course for next spring. Fortunately, I'll have a few weeks when I get back to get it organized before I actually get to the spring semester next year and teach it. So on the teaching side, it's opened a whole new area for me of sort of the policy implications. Again, evidence, in my case, how courts use evidence, and also how evidence is used in policy decisions, regulatory decisions, and similar things. On the research side, I was already making some transition, but this has framed a lot of research questions for me, both on the biological side, questions, I guess I would say it frames questions for me. I'm interested in how brains have evolved to carry out certain tasks, and it sort of framed new interesting questions about what tasks and what the nature of the decision process is. And as I am moving back, I'm rethinking about not what biology I want to do. I'm interested in gene, the evolution of genes involved in social cognition, but what kinds of social cognition, you know, what thought processes, what cognitive processes should I be looking at that are relevant to the kinds of decisions that we end up making in the modern world in a legal context. So it's framed research questions that, I guess in research questions that were already underway, it's given me a sharper focus on exactly how to ask those questions.
Is it important for fellows to have their own policy agendas, or is it sufficient to contribute to related policy with your particular expertise? So, David.
I'll take that, yeah. You know, that's from the legislative side of things. You certainly want to, it's helpful if you have a policy background and you're familiar with the issues, particularly issues that are relevant that Congress is considering today. You know, you want to be up to date on where the issues are at. But if you work in a member's office, you're largely expected to adopt their policy agendas. They will look to you for ideas on occasion. Again, I wasn't in a member's office, but just talking with the other fellows, you certainly, depending on the office you choose, have some say in how maybe an issue might get shaped. But you know, I also think there's plenty of fellows that have the experience where they might come in with something they're really passionate about working on or contributing to, and maybe that just doesn't present itself because the member of Congress has another issue in that space they're working on, or maybe a slightly different opinion on how they want that implemented, and they're the ones that makes the decision at the end of the day. You know, on the committee, it's a little bit more structured. I mean, what I did like about the committee is I was mentioning how day-to-day it's a little bit, can be unpredictable, but you do know the jurisdiction very plain as day. It's on their website. You know what issues you're working on. And again, you know, nobody really cared, you know, nobody cares generally. I'm not talking about in the rooms, in the meetings I went in, people always valued my opinion. But at the end of the day, we're there to support the members on that committee and the ranking member of the committee, and it's his opinions and his views that sort of drive the day. And it would be foolish of anybody to think that they can come in and sway a member of Congress away from maybe a position they've been set in for decades. So I guess I would just say know the structure and who you're working for. Make sure you're comfortable with their policy positions. That's probably more important than feeling like you have to come in and get your own ideas adopted, because that's harder, right? When you come into the legislative branch, there's history in every office. There's history in every committee. The positions are set usually. So it's more important to be able to know where you stand, but also where you're willing to adapt and what you're willing to compromise on, because ultimately you're working for that member and you have to support and present and give their opinions above your own.
Pate, do you have a response?
I do have a response. So in the judicial system, very similar to what David said, but the circumstances are different. One of the early things my mentor, the person I was most working with at the FJC, said to me is, we do not tell federal judges what to do or what to decide. We can, however, offer them suggestions on what questions they might want to ask and what the answers might be. And I thought that was actually a very insightful way, a very helpful way to articulate what our role, what my role would be, or the role of the FJC and that I needed to plug into. And that is, it's true. We don't set policy and don't have it as our mission to even push policy in a particular direction. Unlike David, who was talking about working for particular members of Congress who already have policy agendas, the FJC, the judicial system, has a constituency. The FJC's constituency are the judges. The judges' constituency is the law. So there will be a lot of judges who have come at questions with different perspectives of the way they have been thinking about an issue. So our role is to provide useful information, but also useful analysis. So there's a room for articulating policy choices, I guess is the way I would put it. So not pushing one side or the other, although the analysis you may feel favors one side or another, you can point that out. So I would emphasize that this is not a policy position in the sense of developing and stating policy, but it's a policy and legal analysis position that very much involves talking about the issues or the evidence on each side of an issue.
Yeah, and I would just follow up that for those that might be interested in the legislative branch, that there was a lot of debate early on in terms of you get a choice between a member of Senate's office, a member of the House's office, and a committee staff. And I think it's important in the process that you sort of weigh if policy and sort of being involved, or at least observing those discussions about how policy ideas are developed and shaped and evolve over time, where you're most likely to see that. And a lot of folks do agree. Committee staffs are really important players in the development of policy. That you do, I did have multiple opportunities to sit there and watch discussions over how should the ranking member and how should the committee stand on X, Y, or Z issue. And that was really fascinating. But at the same time, I was part of a staff and low person sort of on that totem pole where they very much respected me, but I was working with mentors that had been on the committee shaping policy in the energy and environment space for maybe 15 plus years on Congress. And so, you can choose a spot that allows you to see more of that, but even then you still have sort of a specific role in it. And I would say sort of Pate nailed it, is even my role in those meetings was to use what I know as a scientist to say, well, here's where the evidence stands and here's what the implications could be if you take this view or that view or this policy position. But ultimately those decisions are happening much higher up the food chain. So think about that in the placement process when you're thinking about if you're a legislative branch fellow, where you might get to see those opportunities, but also make sure you understand the role in those opportunities.
Speaking of the fellowship, was it, as you know, the fellowship has fellows of various career stages. And so how was it transitioning or adjusting to a fellowship where you all are mid-career and, interacting with folks that, early career or later stages in their career? Yeah, just the adjustment to the fellowship. So Pate, you want to take this one?
Yes, well, we, coming in at mid-career, I am older than the average fellow, so there's I don't know what the distribution actually looks like, but I suspect it might be a little bit bimodal with a lot of younger people coming in early career stages, and then, probably not a lot of people in the middle of being an assistant professor take a year to do this, so it's probably then somewhat mid-career people, another cohort, smaller cohort of people. I found it really fun. There are, you may know better than I do, how many of us over 40 fellows there are. but there's a solid handful, enough not to feel alone. In my experience, aside from the first day or so when you're looking around the room and say who looks like me or who has some trait or other that I identify with, pretty quickly at the orientation period, 2 weeks of intensive orientation where you see all the other fellows, it's just more fellows, and the fact that some are tall and some are thin and some are young and some are old pretty quickly, in my experience, disappears. I suppose the only exception I would make to that is that you're at a different stage of your career, so you have a different perspective of what you're going to do with the fellowship as you go back. So some of the conversations as I would talk to various fellows of different ages that I met over the year, and we'd have lunch or just be chatting at some event about what we were going to do. Obviously, the conversations are somewhat different if you are sort of resuming a career versus launching something new.
David?
Yeah, and I mean, for the congressional fellows, there's a bit of a, I think they probably, I have no data to back it up, but it feels like it probably skews a little bit older on average, but I would still sort of place, I think, the average age for our group somewhere in like the, early 30s, and so I'm 39 now, and so I'm a little bit on the other side of that curve. But one of the things that was great about the fellowship is that the fellows that you work with and get to know are just all incredibly impressive and inspiring. And so I think there's sort of the best advice I could give about coming in a little bit older is just don't worry about it. Try to just fit in. You're going to learn something from everybody, and everybody's got a background and experience that makes them more than suited and capable to be where they're at. And so just enjoy that fellowship. I mean, I met some of the most amazing people across all the different branches. I mean, it wasn't just congressional, it was the executive folks. And if I had one regret, it's that I didn't get a chance to meet more people in the class, because you quickly do your orientation, then you disperse. So yeah, I mean, it's a little bit, initially, like Pate said, I think it's like the first day you sort of look around and you sort of gauge, but after that, everyone just starts speaking the same language because we all have the same interests and passion, and we've all got the same backgrounds and training and stories to really, sort of build upon. I think just enjoy it. It was quickly I began enjoying it, and you don't really see where people are at in the different stage of their career. You just sort of measure them on their contributions in the fellowship, and everyone's really doing a great job and has a fun experience to share. So yeah, the fellowship in many ways is a really good equalizer. I mean, we're all interested in the same things and have a really unique opportunity, and we all just want to make the most of it.
We spoke about this a little earlier, but how has this fellowship experience changed your view of politics and public service? And has it changed your, well, not your career path, but how has it changed even your world view? So who wants to take this? I give it up for grabs.
I am happy to do that one first. I get asked about it all the time, being in Congress for what was really sort of a momentous year in American history. No matter where you fall on the ideological spectrum, I think we all have to step back and appreciate it's a fairly unique and sort of historic time, regardless of what side of history you think it's going to be viewed from. I always try to, I take the optimistic view here. There's so much about the everyday operations of Congress that will never break into the media cycle and the average American never knows about. And so just little quirks about the legislative process and the rules of the House and all of these different things were really fascinating to see up close, and I have a whole new appreciation for the procedures that are in place and why they're in place, and the purpose of what Congress is there for. I mean, in some ways it's difficult to pass a bill and complicated because that's the way they want it to be, so that only the best really makes it through. Then the most important takeaway, and I stand by it, is there are really phenomenal people on both sides of the aisle that are working their tail off because they're passionate about working in the federal government on policy issues and trying to improve people's lives and improve society. These are folks that many times on Capitol Hill could be getting paid much more money to work elsewhere, but they value their ability to contribute, and they take it very seriously. So, I mean, people were working incredibly long hours and very knowledgeable. I often tell folks that as someone who cares about the environment, there's not a group that I would want. There's no one else I would rather want working on energy environment issues than the people I got to work alongside and learn under for the year. They were amazing, very knowledgeable, different backgrounds, lawyers, Ph.D. scientists, but they all were laser focused and really sharp and just really impressive and so optimistic and very hopeful that, you know, it may not seem, you hear a lot about the do-nothing Congress and you know, maybe they're not accomplishing a lot, but man, there are people that are grinding and that are really smart and really brilliant, and I don't think they get enough credit. So that's my appreciation of what the year has left with me in government, is that there are people working hard, and I appreciate now what goes into it and how difficult the decisions can be, because there's so many factors at play in the complex systems that is, you know, our government and society.
Yeah, and I would largely echo that. I think again from the perspective of the courts rather than Congress, but working on an issue, in my case, trying to write for courts something that would be useful. I kept discovering as I talked to people. I had the opportunity to go around Washington, you know, meeting lots of people, and incidentally, you know, saying you're a AAAS fellow, saying you're a fellow at the FJC. People are incredibly nice and welcoming to go and talk to almost anybody. I can't think of anybody who would not find time just to talk to me just because I asked and I'm trying to learn more about this issue. So that's been given a lot of chance to get perspective, and I was constantly discovering how much other people have thought about the issues that I thought, you know, I've got some real insights here, and my insights weren't bad, but you know, 90% of the time somebody's gotten there first, because people have been thinking about all of these issues for a long time. And I actually found that a little intimidating, but also really fun and impressive. So that was part of it. And the other piece that David also mentioned is not only meeting people with many different perspectives, including, you know, ideological or political perspectives that are really different from mine. And the way I've sometimes described it is maybe before I was spent some time meeting people from a variety of political backgrounds and talking to them in some depth, actually having to engage on the substance of the issues. You know, I would hear some policy positions and I go, how could you think that? And now I hear those positions, I go, oh, how do you think that? The tone, I still ask, how can you think that? But now I'm really interested to hear their answer. And sometimes that answer is really informative. And I think that's the biggest perspective for me, is actually hearing the answer to that question when somebody's position starts out something I can't believe has any serious thought behind it, and then hearing them actually tell me how that comes about. That's in the judicial branch, you know, there's not so much political ideology, but you're still living in Washington and you're still interacting with the fellows and meeting people in my neighborhood, just everywhere. So you have lots of opportunity to meet people from, you know, Republican, Democrats, liberals, conservatives, you know, all parts of the ideological spectrum, and have substantive conversations. So that's the biggest change to me.
Hey, did your law background help you much within your fellowship?
Oh yes, I mean, there's it's interesting. There's for those of you who don't know, I'm the second judicial fellow, and there's a third coming in soon. Both of the first two of us have law degrees, and the new fellow does not. And I don't think it changes. It helps. You can absolutely use a law background and do more legal research. You just bring a different set of perspectives to the table. The incoming fellow, I don't know exactly what she will be doing, although I've heard a little bit and had a chance to meet her at least by telephone. But it's not that it's a disadvantage. It's not that you need a law degree. The FJC is a research institution, and just like you can be an executive branch or legislative branch fellow, you can absolutely do important, you know, valuable work, make contributions at the FJC. If you have a law degree, you can pick projects that call more on your legal background. And I think that's how I put it. So in my case, I picked projects where there was a real interface of translating some scientific views, not so much scientific conclusions as scientific ways of looking at things, trying to figure out how those fit with the law as it's been applied. Well, that calls for some legal background. I could have framed my project or you know, with my mentors, picked a different area that would not have required quite as much legal research and a little more science.
What is the most important or valuable thing you have done or learned during your time as a fellow? I know you guys spoke to different projects or different areas that you worked on and that was really impactful, but if you can choose one thing that was really important or really valuable, what would that thing be? So, David?
That's really hard. So I'm gonna cheat, and I'm gonna kind of give two, but in different areas. I mean, there's issues that you work on, and then there's sort of the things that you learn and the skills you develop, and so I'm gonna kind of try to give you one of each. And so I think I tell people that the bookends of my experience was around drinking water, which is what we work on here. And I came in, and the big issue right away was the Water Resources Development Act, and it was trying to get some funding to Flint, and obviously for the environmental engineering community that works on water treatment and water distribution, Flint has been something that should never have happened and can't happen again. And so to see that up front and what was being done policy-wise to get that community much desperately needed resources to start rebuilding their infrastructure, that was a great way to start the process. And then it ended with the committee. The bill had already been in the works well before I had gotten there, but to participate in the process of amendments to the Safe Drinking Water Act that would support infrastructure and other really important improvements in drinking water. So for someone who's trained in water quality to get to work on signature issues in my discipline, I mean, come on, you can't beat it. And then just in terms of skills, I think the most valuable thing that I got to do day in, day out was that communicating. I mean, like Pate was saying, a lot of people are quite knowledgeable. I could have really deep conversations about water treatment and water technology with the people that were on the committee, but it also makes me frame those conversations more appropriately for what do policymakers need to hear and what do they need to know. And man, that skill is so important. You can quickly lose people with getting into jargon and getting into technical detail and losing sight of what decisions are usually made around, which are things like public health, who's at risk, economy, how much is it going to cost, who's affected. So, like Pate said earlier, we think about problems when we write proposals one way, but we should never forget that the big picture and societal context it fits into. And this was just 1 year of having that hammered home, and it was so valuable, just so incredibly valuable as a scientist to make sure you're always connected to the societal problem that you're really working on. And I'll value that because it helped me see that so much differently.
Yeah, I agree. It's a really hard question to answer. I think and not only to pick one thing, but also to articulate the very subjective thing that stands out most for me, and it's a sense of having a bit more of a personal understanding of Washington. Now that's a sort of a big claim, to have been here for all of a year. But what I mean is, it doesn't seem like this sort of strange, mysterious place. And really, sometimes simple thing. I mentioned, just being able to write people or contact people who have a position and you read about it. I've now had the experience of sort of read something in the newspaper that somebody's doing some initiative and say, oh, that's relevant to my project. How would I ever, find out what that person is doing? And, a year ago I said, how could you, I read this person, they've got a title, they're in Washington, how would I figure out anything? Now I go, oh, I guess I should write them and ask them if I could come over. And just, first of all, being astonished how, the people you read about in the paper who are very busy people, they don't always say, yes, I'll drop everything, but I actually can't think of a time when I didn't get a response. And and they 90+% of the time would say, yes, let's set up a time. Maybe if they were, had a very senior position, they might say, come, talk to this person in my office, they'll help set up a time, and they did it. The other really simple things to me, I'll sound very naive, and I guess I was, but just, walking over to the Capitol, walking over to the Department of Justice, walking over to the Supreme Court, and going in. I mean, just You know, can I go in? Yeah, you can go in. It's a public building. It's a government office. And those really simple things that you can talk to people who are part of the government. You can go in buildings that are part of the government. You know, it's our government. And I know that sounds like what you should learn in 4th grade. And I guess I did learn it in 4th grade, but when you do it and you actually walk up to the door and somebody says, can I help you? And say, I'd like to go in. They say, sure, go over there. Or you write somebody and say, could I talk to you about what you do? And they answer you and say, sure, you can talk to me. Or if I can't talk to you, you can talk to this person in my office. And just that sense of having not so much how to navigate Washington as it is. You know, there are tons of skills in doing that I've only, you know, barely scratched the surface of. But just the fact that you can navigate Washington, it's open to citizens to just come to Washington and do it.
Okay. Well, any other questions from the audience or from the participants? Please write your questions down. I'll be open to taking them. And in the meantime, I guess we can, if there isn't any other questions, what we can do is wrap things up with Pate and David to quickly share some parting advice. So for someone thinking about the AAAS S&T Policy Fellowship and delving into science policy, what advice would you give? So David, I'll let you take this one.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a great question. I mean, I think the best advice is practice where you can, talking to as many different stakeholders as possible about the issues you care about and understanding what their perspectives are on it and the issue, the angle of the issue that matters to them. I think one of the things I value more than anything, because you can have access to so many people and so many people are involved in these decisions, and everyone sees a problem slightly different ways. Communication is everything, and being able to empathize with the different stakeholders and the different communities you might interact with around an issue and understand their concerns, and then really be relatable and try to find solutions that help them and address their concerns. So I think that's part of it, is really work on the, as a scientist or an engineer, think about the communication angle. What matters to people? How can you help them? And what evidence do you have to sort of inform those decisions? Just practice that experience, because it's useful. Because you go through the interview process and you sit down with whether it's the executive branch or the legislative branch, and people want to know what you're interested in, the issues you want to work on, and some of the views on them, and you got to be able to explain it to people that might be coming from many different backgrounds or many different perspectives on the issue. As a fellow, when you show up for orientation, you show up on the job, it goes both ways. I mean, I always would tell people, why did I do this? I felt like I could help, but I also felt like I had a lot to learn. And I think a lot of us are probably coming into this thinking we have a lot we can contribute and we can help, and we can help sort of right wrongs and get the ship moving in the right direction. But come ready to learn. Come open to learn. Respect other people's opinions. Be a good listener. Be ready to learn. You're going to have so much information, so many opportunities. That let that, be open to that, and don't come and think it's your way or the highway. Be open to other perspectives and let that sort of shape you, and you're going to end up being a really better person and better science policy sort of interfacial specialist, if you will, when it's all said and done.
I would echo a lot of that as well. I think the fellowships are a fantastic way. I have a hard time figuring out better ways, any better way to start this process. I sort of said a few minutes ago, just do it, come to Washington and engage your government. And as a citizen, you can do that. You can come up and meet with your congressman or like somebody else. But the fellowships are a way to have this organizational backing where you get the orientation, you end up placed someplace, and there you are in a part of government that is in your area of interest, and you're off. You're started with that engagement process. I would really echo what David said about coming to learn. I mean, as I'm sort of in my last day of my fellowship, I am so much more excited about what I am taking back than even about as I was coming in, I was excited to do things, to see what I could do. But that's a year, and it goes by incredibly fast. Everybody will tell you that, and you just can't articulate it strongly enough. It just flies by. So what you can get done, I mean, it's great to do things, and I'm very pleased to have gotten to engage with some serious legal and policy issues. But so much more is what I'm taking back and what I'll be able to do, you know, over the coming years. So the learning, what I have learned and about the process in Washington and what I've learned about substantive issues, you know, will pay off so much more in the coming years than I've had time to produce over this year. So definitely the learning is much more important than much more valuable in the long run than what you actually produce.
Any other parting words you would like to share with the participants?
I mean, I'll just throw out, I guess I'm sure you all can get information, or my information, if people have follow-up questions or additional advice. I'm happy to be a resource as best I can. If you can spell my last name, you can find me on Google. It's the curse of a very unique name. But honestly, I think with the alumni network, a lot of people have different experiences, but and I'm not saying anybody doesn't enjoy their experience, but I particularly loved mine, and I'm happy to sort of be as much of an ambassador and help folks out with it. I think it's a valuable program, and if I can help after this video conference, I'm happy to be open to assist people.
And I echo that as well. You know, easily available online search will show you how to reach me.
All right. And that brings us to the end of our time. I want to thank our panelists, David and Pate, for joining us today and sharing their fellowship experience and policy insight with us. And I want to thank the audience for joining and for all of your great questions. If we couldn't get to your question today, send us an email at fellowships@AAAS.org. Join us on September 28th for the next chat in our series, where we will be talking about the application and interview process, and fellows will share advice and tips. You can find a list of upcoming chats and on-demand links for previous chats in the series on the fellowship's website. As a reminder, we are currently accepting applications for the 2018-19 fellowship year. Deadline to apply is November 1st. Visit the fellowship's website for information and details related to the application process. Thanks again for joining us today. Have a wonderful afternoon.